How's it going, everybody? I am Ron Sparkman, and I am the Chief Curiosity Correspondent for the Space Foundation Discovery Center. And today we are here with the one and only Dr. Ulyana Horodyskyj. It only took me 5 years to say that correctly, so I'm very, very proud of myself. And we've been really, really good friends and had some really cool adventures together. So I'm really excited to talk with her today. Uli, how are you doing? Dr. Skittles herself.
Doing well, thank you. I just could see my name down there. I couldn't fit the whole thing, right? So good job.
So Uli does some really, really incredible things, and we're going to start off with the question I like to ask everybody. What was your original inspiration to get into space and science?
So yeah, I started really young with the interest. I had parents who were really invested in our learning. And so there was a lot of experiences we were able to do when I was younger, including the most influential one. I was 6 years old. We went to the Swiss Alps and had a snowball fight in July. And with my older brothers, and I was just like, man, I really love the mountains. I love being outdoors. So I think there was this imprinting that happened pretty early on. And then as far as space, I wanted to be an astronaut since I was a little kid. It was just this fascination with what's out there. And my parents really fostered that interest as well, to the point where when I was in high school, I think you know this, Ron, when I did the science fair project on solar sails. So traveling to Mars, for example, using the power of the sun, so, and then actually fiction, if you will, became fact many years later when solar sails went up. So.
And so that it's really kind of cool. Carl Sagan, obviously, and we're both on shirt. Well, hold on, Carl's way at the bottom here. Carl's at the bottom. There we go. Light sails were a really big love of Carl Sagan, and now we've gotten to see Light Sail 2 even launch with Planetary Society with Bill Nye at the helm. So it's really cool that was the beginning of it. Now you kind of you got to see that come to fruition. That's kind of amazing.
Yeah. So I wasn't obviously any part of like launching the sales or anything, but did, the basic research as a high schooler did, computer programming and building these little models, but it got me pretty far. In fact, it's how I was able to afford college. So for competing in the science fairs and things. So.
Speaking of college, you have a PhD and you are one of the world-renowned, I would say you are one of the world-renowned glaciologists out there doing really, really amazing things. So for people that don't know what glaciology is or what a glaciologist is, can you kind of give us some information on that?
We go to very cold places. And we sometimes even climb very high mountains to collect basically snow and ice samples to understand the history of our climate, to understand how that's changing. Right. So this is a really hot topic, if you will. Climate change has been on everyone's minds. And where do we get this information? So the glaciologist is the scientist that goes to the places like the Arctic, Antarctica, and also mountains, right? The Andes, Kilimanjaro, like you went with us, to collect these samples and actually read the history that's revealed in the ice. And I also, I actually started as a geologist, so I'm also reading the history of the rocks. So both rocks and ice tell a story of change. And I really just enjoyed history as a kid as well, just really understanding, exploration and explorers, like what kinds of adventures they went on. So I think that kind of fueled the interest to where I wanted to go out and do these things in the sciences, but also with that kind of old school exploration mindset.
That's it's kind of incredible what you get to do. You actually just got back from Antarctica, so you were in Antarctica, and before that you were, I don't remember where you were before that. Then before that we were in Africa in Kilimanjaro. Yeah. So like you're constantly out there, but Antarctica's got to be one of the coolest ones, and I know you had a truly incredible experience. So can you tell us a little bit about why you went and what this was? And this wasn't your first time there either, right?
Yeah, so my first time actually was back in 2007. And so I was actually part of a research vessel, kind of crew, if you will. Rice University was my undergrad university. And so I remember asking freshman year of college, how could I go to Antarctica? Like, I really want to learn more about like the kind of science that's done there. And plus it's Antarctica, right? Like the coolest place on earth. And by the time I became a senior in college, I got an opportunity. So that was my first intro. I worked on a research vessel, a working ship. So I got to do many different things. Ship operations, I'd be out there on the back deck working and making sure we're getting our samples, basically whatever they needed me to do as an undergrad assistant. And then Just February, I worked aboard the Greg Mortimer, this ship. It's a passenger ship. It's for tourism with an element of citizen science. So this is kind of near and dear to my heart, citizen science. It's kind of what I've been transitioning to post-PhD, is to be really going into science education and going to these wild places with people and actually hopefully enhancing their experience and understanding of what they're seeing, right? So it's one thing to like go to these places and see the penguins and the ice and rocks and be like, wow, that's really cool. But to actually understand, do you know what you're looking at is millions of years old? And before that rock uplifted, the Antarctica was covered in rainforest, those kinds of things. So science storytelling. So luckily I got back the first week of March before this whole pandemic broke. But yeah, it was an absolutely incredible experience. And I hope to continue to go and do those kinds of trips.
So what's been your favorite one so far, your favorite expedition? I know you've had a lot of them. So is there a particular one that jumps out in your mind? I bet I can guess what it probably was.
Let's see if you can guess.
I was going to guess the one you did with Ricardo.
Oh, so yeah, I mean, we've had so many incredible ones. Absolutely. So I would say there's two that kind of rank in the, well, there's three. Mont Blanc, when we went and climbed in the French Alps, because that's where Ricardo proposed to me, on top of the highest point there in the Alps. And it was an intense climb, you know, and it was just, you have to cross ladders over crevasses. And so very like kind of technical climbing, which is interesting. And like we had to totally trust each other as climbing partners. Mm-hmm. So that one ranks up there, and also was able to collect snow samples. And it was when Europe was going through one of their biggest heat waves. And you could just even see smog in the air too. So I wanted to see like how that smog, if it did in fact land on the snow, and what impacts that would have on melting. Because, you know, it's not just about the impacts to the snow, but it can actually affect climbing routes. So there's that whole other purpose of my research, to be like, how is that going to be affected? And then the Andes survivors go there like for me, it's been like 3 years now. So the story behind that one in a nutshell is my husband, Ricardo, found the coat, wallet, and passport of one of the Andes survivors in 1972. It was this plane crash. And if you guys have read the book or seen the movie Alive, it outlines the story of an incredible 72-day epic of these 16 boys just surviving. They're not used to the cold and altitude. They're from Uruguay. And so to be able to go to that site, and also with Eduardo, who's a survivor, that's the coat and wallet that Ricardo found, to go with him, you know, to that site, stunning. And then the one that was the most challenging.
Got chills just remembering.
Yeah, you should come on that trip. Oh man, it's just like the first time I was in tears at the memorial, because there's just this power you feel there of like what transpired. And you're standing there with one of the survivors who's having his own, you know, moment there, mm-hmm. you know, reflecting and remembering. And then it's hard to describe. But it's one of those things that is just, it can be life-changing, especially when we all now are going through a lot of adversity and our own challenges, to then stand at a site where one of the best survival stories, right, occurred and what they went through, and it gives some perspective. So I really love that trip. I'm so grateful to have been, you know, included as part of that. And then I would say the most adventurous trip, and that was pretty much the most challenging, was Baffin Island. I actually just recently posted about it on Friday. I do these Expedition Fridays where I post previous photos like never before seen from past expeditions. So I flew with a teammate, Jorge, from Boulder all the way up to Baffin Island in a Cessna 210. He was the pilot. You know, I kind of was like, can I grab control and do all this stuff? Ooh, this is fun. But I am not a pilot. I'm trying to get more experience. But that was just an incredible adventure. So 5 days of flying to get up to this ice cap. And then we worked with the local Inuits there, who took us on snowmobile to our field site, and realized we couldn't actually get to our field site because the sea ice was melting faster than normal, which is kind of what we were up there to study, melt rates, and looking also at impacts of pollution. But yeah, we had so much adversity on that trip of things to deal with that I kind of like reflecting on that experience, thinking like what's going on in the world right now.
And you mentioned Eduardo, and I want to talk about him just real quick because it was really nice of I think it was both you and Ricardo were nice enough to get me an autographed copy of his book for my birthday, which he gave to me in Africa before we did Kilimanjaro, and we'll get to that in just a second. But I love that Eduardo has taken this thing that was this incredible experience that could, you know, really kind of kill the creativity and just take the life out of someone, and he's put it into his art. and so many other things in the book. I haven't completely finished the book, I'll be honest, but everything I've read in it so far was great. Like it's just an incredible story, and it's cool that I can only imagine what it's like to go up on a trip like that with somebody that's reliving it. And so that's it, out of the silence after the crash. And one thing that I know that's really interesting too, going back to the work that you do, is that there are things that you discover going on this yearly trip now because of the changing climate, that as stuff is melting, there's pieces that you've never found. Like, didn't you find like a new piece of the plane now that nobody's seen since the original, since the crash, probably, what was it, in the 70s?
Yeah, so the crash happened in 1972. And so Ricardo and Eduardo have been going back to the site since 2006. So they have this incredible collection of photos of how the glacier's been changing, as well as he's really good at finding stuff. He should have been an archaeologist. But yeah, so this year, a bottle was found. This is the bottle that all the survivors drank from. So they would take snow and melt it on a part of the plane, and it would drip into the bottle. So finding that, it's like, whoa, every survivor drank from this. And then it transports you back to the story, of what happened. And then when Ricardo reunited Eduardo with that, he was like, wow. He was actually wondering, did you find that bottle perhaps? So yeah, because the glacier is melting so much, I mean, just in the last few years that I've been going, like I said, I think I mentioned I've been going for 3 years now. It's stunning how many of these like crevasses are opening up, and how much stuff is on the surface now. That brings like a whole new chapter to the story, if you will. It's been how many years? Not even 50 yet. So it's just showing how rapidly things are melting and changing up there as well.
And so we were talking a little bit earlier about the trek that we did. We did Kilimanjaro this last August, late August, September, and that's really kind of the crux of what you do. A lot of the work you do is with the company you created, Science in the Wild, where you go on expeditions. You take people like me, regular people or scientists, really kind of anyone, on these treks to some of the most amazing places in the world. But it's not just climbing. It's not just an expedition. You get to learn about the science. We get to do some really, really, really cool things. So share with us a little bit about how you came up with the idea for such an amazing experience, and why you decided kind of to mix those two together. I think two of your favorite passions.
Yeah, so it was, this kind of idea was probably planted in my brain about 10 years ago. So I had this idea for an adventure science school. And I got the idea because when I was living in Boulder at the time and just starting graduate school, I saw this adventure film school in Boulder. Like, wonder if like there could be something like that for science, because science, most times people lose their interest in like middle school, right? So it's like we kind of start losing people then. And how can I foster curiosity and this interest in science? So we should bring in some adventure. And I myself was just starting to dabble in climbing and mountaineering. I mean, I've gotten really serious about it just in the last few years. And that's many thanks to Ricardo, since he's a mountain guide and kind of really gotten me into shape. But that kind of planted the idea of like a mix of these things to make science more interesting and appealing, providing people with immersive experiences. So back in 2013 and 14, I lived in Nepal on a Fulbright. And so I was out there for about 10 months doing my field work on a glacier for my PhD. And I had lots of tourists who would see me with stuff out on the glacier, like this huge backpack or a raft, ice axe, and kind of making my way down into these lakes that were on the surface of the glacier and put a boat in. They'd be like, what is she doing? So I got approached a lot by people who were like, hey, could we help? Can we go for a ride in the boat? Kind of those kinds of things. So I was like, this might be an interesting business idea to be able to offer these kinds of immersive experiences. And I think like experiential learning is the best way to teach science, right? Literally getting your hands dirty. I mean, you remember, Ron, when we were working with some of those little kits in Kilimanjaro to test the soils, and you have to actually like put droplets of water in and mix the chemicals. So
I kind of remember there was oxygen deprivation, just a little bit. There's the can't breathe, but here's some water.
Every expedition I learned something new, right, of what works and what doesn't. And so like I've crafted Kilimanjaro more so as like a science educational experience versus research. Like Nepal was pretty heavy on join a research trip, add to the body of knowledge. Kilimanjaro is pretty challenging because you have to hike all those days at altitude, right? And if you're not used to it, do science, what? So instead, so you don't kind of get irritated at having to like do all this work up there. It's more about, if you want, you can learn this. It's more about your education here. And before you leave a trip, you get this pamphlet where I've written about, the history of Kilimanjaro, the kinds of things we'll be up to. So read that kind of primer, I guess you can call it, beforehand to kind of see what we're going to be doing. And then no pressure, right? Like participate as much as you want, enjoy it. I really kind of try to craft it more as science storytelling again, because I think, again, when you can tell stories to people about what they're seeing, it sticks much more than graphs and charts, right?
Mm-hmm. I agree. And it's really fun because the more that we got into it, the easier that the science got as the hike got harder. So at 14,000 feet, it wasn't as bad. We were kind of doing the water testing and stuff. But once we got kind of, you're at, what was it? What was the base camp? 15?
The high camp was like 15.5. Yeah, okay, it was high.
So it's 15.5 for that, and it wasn't really too much. Like, we're just going to test some stuff here. Like, Ron, you can go ahead and go back, lay back down. You look like you're about to pass out.
Yeah, so it's like I've had to learn, as we go along, just kind of like learning to read people and what they're capable of and not, both on the physical side of things and on the science. And again, not pressuring people to like, you have to do this, because that is the last thing I want, because that's, again, how people get disconnected from the science, right? Then don't want to do it because it's too hard or I can't understand it. Mm-hmm. So there's all these variables going against you when you're on one of those expeditions. So I've learned to like try to do things more creatively to still foster that curiosity and science.
And you mentioned the Fulbright scholarship that you got earlier. For people that don't know about that, what is that scholarship? Because I only learned about it from you. I had never heard of it until you told me about it with your time in Nepal.
Yeah, so it's an exchange. Well, not an exchange program. I guess there are some people that come from the country to the U.S., but it's not literally an exchange program. But basically, you are bringing your culture, language, and ideas to a different country. So you're kind of an exchanging of ideas, and you spend anywhere from like 3 months to a full year. And a key component of a Fulbright is that you are doing something for the community in which you're working. And so typically it's heavier, I guess, kind of on social sciences. And my project for the PhD was more hard science. Like I'm going to do physics and hydrology when I'm working on these lakes and the glaciers. But there's a really important part to my project, and that's including the local communities, because without them, I couldn't do my work. They have a lot of intimate knowledge of the landscapes, right? And they want to learn. They're eager for this as well. They want to know what scientists are doing. So I created this Sherpa Scientist Initiative. So that allowed allowed us to integrate the local community, the Sherpas there, into our work. And I felt that was a really key component. So Fulbright always has that component where you're giving back to that community. And at the same time, like I was learning some Nepali. They were practicing their English. So a really neat kind of exchange. And also cultures, they're like, what is it like in America? A lot of them are really curious. They haven't ever traveled before. So very interesting experience, very eye-opening. And the one thing that was interesting coming home was just how deafening the silence was on the streets, because in Kathmandu, there's honking. Honking is a way of life, constantly beep, beep, beep. You probably remember that from.
It really is here. It's like, I feel it takes so long. It took me so long to get used to it. I'm like, why is everybody honking constantly? Yeah. I understand a lot of places like there, South Korea, Vietnam. It's like, it's the honk, especially if you're on bikes.
Right. So you have it takes a while to get used to that, right? To get used to it. And then I came home and I'm like, wow, it's so weird to not have that then. So there was actually this like reverse culture shock for me. It's like, or I went to a Costco and I'm like, oh my God, there is so much food here. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to like just grab it all and bring it, over, because like there's no balance, right? There's like so much excess here and then not enough there. So it really, beyond the science and the stuff I was doing there, made me really think about just how lucky we are to live here and how I want to pay it forward in some way. And that's what I've been trying to do with my company, paying it forward to people who are maybe got cast aside, left behind with science, but still have this interest, but are uncertain, or who don't feel like they could climb a mountain. You can do both with our company, right? So that's kind of the idea there. Was just it started kind of like as a passion project. And I've seen people's lives change as a result. So it just encourages me to keep doing this. And obviously we can't travel right now with the pandemic, but there's other ways to reach people, like what we're doing here. Science communication, absolutely important.
And it's hard to go to Nepal and not come back changed. I mean, that was still, I've got to go on some really amazing trips since kind of science pushed me down this path that I decided I want to be, explorer and go out and see more of the world. But I don't think that anything was more amazing than that Everest Base Camp trek. But not just that, but like going to see Chitwan. And you spent some really serious time there. And I know that it's a place that you fell in love with, and Ricardo as well. And Ricardo's is now in the process of training to go back to Everest. Yeah. And I know that he talks about very much the same thing. The money that he's raising, he's like, I want to help the locals there. And that's something you both do with the. And let me make sure that let me look up the name because I always switch up parts of it differently.
Yeah.
For Summit Songs and Science, I don't know why, but I always want to say Science Summits and Songs. I don't know, and I guess because I'm just so used to science in the wild. But
yeah.
I know that that's something that's really big for the two of you, and that's a different project that you and he do together. How does that differ from Science in the Wild?
Yeah, so the project Summit Songs and Science, he started it. He was like, you know what? I want to bring music and joy and fitness to people, right? So it's kind of like songs and summits to start. And then we're like, well, what about like bringing in a science component as well, right? So to really like all the places that we're traveling to, let's bring in all these things. So hence that project was born. So the idea behind it is to promote, fitness, good lifestyle choices. And we're doing this through climbing mountains. And so the goal is the 50 state high points, the 7 summits, as well as Colorado's 100 highest. So those are the physical mountains we're climbing. And then Ricardo's producing music videos, either solo or with his band, for each of those high points. And then I'm producing what's called science shorts. And I have a pair of science shorts, these red shorts that dance. I'm like, it's very crude, me trying to make these science videos. I am not skilled in filmmaking. It's just, but I'm learning, right? And the learning also how to do science storytelling within those videos, right? Like 2-minute kind of things, a nice fact maybe, or something interesting about that high point or that state that we travel to that you might not know. So again, science education there. So it's been a really cool project, and up to this point we were making some pretty good progress. And when the pandemic hit, we kind of changed that focus a bit to be like, all right, we're going to disseminate as much information as we can to you, the science, the hard facts about COVID-19. What can you do to stay healthy, and safe through it? What is the science telling us? I'm not a health scientist, so I need to defer to the people who know best. So that's where my role comes in. And then you've probably seen on Facebook Live on Ricardo's page all the virtual concerts he's been holding. Mm-hmm. And the feedback people have been giving him saying like, music is just soothing us right now. And it's such an important piece. And so Science in the Wild has also been trending more towards STEAM, right? Not just STEM, science, tech, engineering, and math, but now the arts. The arts is a really key component. And well-rounded education is key to our mission as well. So that's how the two are kind of integrating as well.
I can't agree with you more. It's been the A has been something that's been very important for me. If it wasn't for the visuals and the music and like the kind of the poetry and the storytelling that happened with Cosmos, I don't know that. I mean, I had to see it visually. You can hear tens of billions or hundreds of billions or trillions of planets and moons and stars and all this stuff, and like, okay, cool. What's a trillion really mean? We don't really know how to fathom the richest person on the planet having $100 billion. It's just such a massive word, but when you see these things and you can visualize it, it connects with you so much more. And I think that's one of the reasons that art is so important. And I love the fact that he's doing that, and you all have found ways to mix it and do some really cool and interesting things with it. And you were mentioning, when it comes to health, that you're not a health scientist, but you want to do what you can. And so we do have some of the folks from Project Possum who have been talking a lot about the different health things. And that's also something that you do too. You're also one of the teachers for the Project Possum platform, which you introduced me to. By the way, say that 3 times fast. Platform and the program and all the stuff that they're doing over there. And so I know that you're in the process of teaching a class right now. So can you tell us a little bit about what you do for Project Possum?
Yeah, so Project Possum is this amazing citizen science astronautics program, really looking at science at the edge of space. And so there's also a component to it, though, that is ground-based, because with NASA looking towards the moon, Mars, and beyond, it's really important to have skill sets that you could adapt to other planetary bodies. So before I did my PhD in glaciology, I actually got a master's in planetary geology. And so I co-teach this class with Dr. Jose Hurtado. He's a planetary geologist. And so it's a great collaboration. And it's a mixture of science and technology, right? So the science is we're learning about Moon and Mars, and then we're ideally going to a field site very similar to that. That field work is now postponed. So we're doing just like webinar teaching right now. But that's the technology part, though, is the students then get to build their own tools. So they get to build some kind of tool to answer some scientific question. So to give you an idea, we're working out on a volcanic field that looks pretty similar to part of Mars. And we want to sample that rock, but we're in a spacesuit and we can't quite, get that sample. We can't bend over. If we do, we fall, right? And so what kind of tool could we devise, for example, to grab and get that sample? That's just one example of a tool someone came up with. So they're crafting these ideas in the class. And then Chris Lundin, who's a member of Project Possum, he then builds those designs. So that's the engineering aspect in collaboration with the students. And then the ultimate test is, does it work out in the field, right? Because oftentimes there's failures. I mean, I could tell you so many stories of field fails, right? But it's part of being a scientist. So they get a chance to not only learn this stuff, textbook kind of stuff, but then go out into the field and apply something they've learned and see how it works. So I think that whole process is so important. That's why I love being part of Project Possum also. It just brings together people from all walks of life all around the world with a common mission of just learning more and what they can do to contribute. And so that whole citizen science component, again, right, is just so crucial, I think. Just to see so many people involved in it and interested is so encouraging.
And so just a couple more questions left, and this is a big one for a lot of people right now as people are trying to deal with isolation, something that's new to them that they haven't maybe dealt with, is that you've got experience with this. Not only have you done an analog isolation mission, but you did it for the NASA Hera project, and you were the commander of it as well. So not only did you have to deal with it, but you had to be a leader in that situation. That might be something a little different. So tell us a little bit about that experience and maybe some of the lessons that you learned from that.
For sure. So yeah, that was a pretty intense experience. So HERA stands for Human Exploration Research Analog. So the idea behind it is NASA wants to understand the effects of isolation as well as confinement on groups of people that don't know each other at the start. So when you actually have a NASA mission, the astronauts going on it are going to be spending a lot of time together to really understand, how they work as a team. So this is an interesting experiment. 4 strangers locked together in a habitat that's like 650 square feet, right? Small space for 30 days. And you can't go outside, right? So there's no sunshine. The only exercise we could get would be an exercise bicycle, lifting weights. And then there's a ladder that connected the 2 levels that I would climb up and down. Like I made it a challenge for the team to be like, let's see if by the end of these 30 days, we can climb the equivalent height of Kilimanjaro. So we measured the height of the ladder and then went up and down, up and down. So I think I really learned to be creative in such a confined environment of how to lead a group. And I also learned how to listen really well and follow the lead of someone who was an expert in something I was not an expert in. I think it's really important to be able to do both. And also keeping a positive attitude. I mean, people are going to get on each other's nerves in such a tight space, just even in a week. So imagine in 30 days. So understanding yourself, having the self-awareness, and also communication was so key. Like, I'm really sorry, I'm in a bad mood right now. It's not personal. There's no weakness in saying that. It's actually a strength to have that self-awareness and then to communicate that to your team members. So in confinement now, these stay-at-home orders, same thing. I think communication is going to be crucial. And also, like, there are spaces we could spread out, right? Because there are 2 levels. So we could have, okay, you 2 stay up here, we 2 stay down here. We can have some sense of privacy or space that way. The most intense part of it was being awake for almost 40 hours. It was part of the sleep deprivation study and no caffeine, right? And so that's when, tempers can flare. And so really able to manage that. That was thankfully near the end of the 30 days. We kind of known each other more as a team and how we behaved. But that, I would say, was the most challenging part. And I was proud of the fact that no one walked out on the experiment and we all made it through. We did all, the science mission and everything that we were supposed to. But for me, the most important thing, the testament to like a good team, was that we were able to work out these problems and no one walked out, because in that experiment, you always have the option to do that.
And so we got a question from the audience, and Brad McKinnon wants to know what your next adventure is. What's coming next for you? And I'm kind of interested in it too. Like, you're always trying to top yourself in a sense, but some of it's work, but there's also what's the next big challenge. So Mars, Titan.
No, well, I did apply to NASA again.
I was gonna ask. I figured you did, because you got to like the top 160, 180 or something.
Yeah, it was so for the class of 2017, it was top 120. But you know what? That doesn't mean anything like this year, right? I couldn't not even make the first cut. So I am fully aware, and kind of expect that no, but still shoot for it anyhow. I think that's important, and like also just to have a career you really enjoy. So I have been kind of trending towards more of this polar guiding. So when you talked about, or asked me rather, about Antarctica, I'm like, wow, this is actually really enjoyed this experience. I didn't see this as kind of a career path a few years ago. So now I'm pursuing more of that kind of polar guiding certification and more experience in those areas. So I think the new adventure is kind of working still in polar regions, kind of just expanding my my skill set. But as far as Science in the Wild goes, we just launched the Academy. So that's teaching lessons to people who want private lessons on anything science and arts related. And then also, I just beta tested this on some nieces this weekend, but science story time. So pictures from a specific expedition and just telling a story of what it was like out there. So I'm kind of pursuing this realm now in the near kind of future. And as well as I've collected a lot of footage, from all these expeditions I want to turn into virtual experiences. That's what I'm trying to say. So that people can also experience this like from their desktop, right? So I don't want people to feel like they're missing out if they can't come on an expedition, right? You can still have this experience. You can still learn from it. So that's kind of a new next step for Science in the Wild. And as far as expedition, I haven't planned anything much because everything's just so uncertain. But I do have a goal of getting up the 7 summits and doing science on all of them. So it's kind of that long term.
Nice. So for anybody that has an interest in what you do or was inspired by your story today, what's some words of advice to kind of follow in the footsteps? Your very big footsteps. If they want to do something like what you do.
Yeah. Thanks. Well, I really like the saying, dreams don't work unless you do, right? So I think it's important, like, to have those big dreams, like I said, with NASA, to keep shooting for those big dreams, especially now with like Artemis missions, the moon. But knowing it's going to take a lot of work, a lot of discipline, and being happy in the career you ultimately choose. So pursue it because you love it, because that is when it's going to not feel like work. That's probably how you feel, Ron, right? Like you don't even feel like you're working, like you love it that much. That's important, that kind of passion, right? And then another favorite saying of mine is, don't tell me the sky's the limit when there are footprints on the moon, right? Because I love it, because it's like we, what possibility is there for us, like in life? What's the future hold, in just 10, 20 years? Where's humanity going to be? So I love to think about those kinds of things as well. Oh, nice. Perfect. And, continuing to be creative, right? Like this pandemic is causing a lot of changes in the way we work, the way we interact with people. And I think like being able to adapt to that and continue to be creative through this all. And so looking towards my own future, like I really want to reach as many people as possible through science and adventure, whether it's through people coming on expeditions, following our stuff online, and hopefully interacting in these virtual experiences coming soon.
And so where can people find you so they can be a little bit more involved with these virtual experiences that you all are working on? Can you give us like your website, social media, all that fun stuff?
Sure. Yeah. So scienceinthewild.com is the webpage. You'll see there's 2 tabs right now that have a lot more information on them. The Academy is where you can get in touch about these private lessons I mentioned. And I'm creating a science story time one, so you can request that. And then the lab has past field reports. If you want to find out what was a past expedition like, just on paper, I've kind of written some field reports there. And then on Instagram, the same thing, at Science in the Wild, trying to post photos like twice a week at this point to show some science on Wednesdays, and then show expedition kind of cool adventure stuff on Fridays.
I love it. It's amazing. And thank you so much for joining us today, Uli. It's always great to talk to you. This is like the fourth or fifth time we've done interviews over the years, and there's always something new and cool and interesting to talk with you about. And for those that want to learn more, this is only just really the first part of it. Uli was kind enough to join us for a Space4U podcast that'll be coming out this Friday. So make sure you check it out. There's always more stuff to talk about with her because she's always up to so many amazing things. So do make sure that you check that out. Space4U podcast that will be dropping on this Friday. Uli, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, and take good care with the snow out there. It's middle of April, and here we are.
And Uli's actually also going to join us for one of our upcoming Space After Dark events called Climate. With a little play on words there. So we're going to talk about how you can be an adventurer and go out in the world and kind of see what's going on with climate science and be a part of it. And she's going to be joining us as well as my guest that will be on Space4U Live this Friday, which is Dr. Graham Lau, who's an astrobiologist, also from CU Boulder, just like Uli is. So make sure you check in for that. That's going to be really awesome. And that is going to conclude this episode of the live edition of Space Foundation Space4U show, podcast, whatever. I can't remember what I'm calling it. Keep your eyes and ears open for more Space4U episodes by checking out our social media outlets on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And of course, at our website, spacefoundation.org. And don't forget all the amazing educational resources that we now have on discoverspace.org. So if there's something you want to see for you and your kids or kind of do some really cool lessons, make sure to check that out on our website. And on all those outlets and more, it's our goal to inspire, educate, connect, and advocate for the space community, because at the Space Foundation, we will always have space for you. Thank you so much for joining, and we'll see you on the next show. Actually, I guess we should technically do that, right?